Hi, it's Nick Aster with TriplePundit.com here at the 2013 edition of South by Southwest Eco. I'm here with Brandon TIdwell. He's the manager of sustainability for Darden Restaurants. And you guys are a big parent company for a lot of the more well-known, sort of higher-end chain restaurants out there. Can you give us just a scope of your impact? I mean, how many millions of meals are you serving daily?
Well, so we're currently at 8 brands and 2,100 restaurants across the U.S. and Canada that we wholly own and operate. Every day we serve over 1 million meals. It's about 425 million meals that we'll serve on an annual basis. A little over 200,000 employees are across the country. So every day we are in front of our guests and serving them a variety of different foods, ranging from Olive Garden, Red Lobster, and Longhorn Steakhouse all the way to Eddie V's and Capitol Grill.
Okay, now that's a lot of food, so there's going to be a lot of an impact here. There's going to be a big footprint. We've got issues like food waste and everything else that comes in between. Can you just give us an idea of, simple question here, right, but what does sustainability mean for Darden?
Yeah, I think it's a great question because I think for a restaurant company in particular, our impact is not just what we do within our 4 walls, which is where we've been putting a lot of our attention over the last couple of years with our 15 by 15 goals to reduce water and energy and our long-term zero waste commitment. Because
Can you tell us what that meant, 15 by 15?
15 to reduce our per restaurant usage by 15% by 2015. Both on energy and water, and we're at 12% on energy and at 15% on water. So we've reached one of our goals. We still have a few more years to close that 3% gap on energy usage. And then on zero waste, we're at about a 30% diversion. So there's a lot of room to grow, particularly around organics, recycling, I think is where we see as our next biggest opportunity there. And then food waste tends to be 40% of all food produced in the United States. Is thrown away, and so this is a real opportunity for us to reduce food waste, both in our restaurants as well as with our guests.
Do you have any particular goals with that in mind?
We have a goal, a publicly stated goal, being zero waste. We don't have a specific deadline for when that will be achieved, partly because much of the 2,100 restaurants sit in local municipalities, and so waste management structures determine the opportunities that are available for organics recycling. And so we can drive certain amounts of it, but a good bit of it is really driven by what the local municipalities are able to offer.
Now, it sounds like you guys have made great progress. You've already gotten one of your 15-15 goals met, almost there with the other.
Right.
You got plans to push it, go a little beyond that?
That's a great question. We're going through that strategic planning process right now, and in the next year or two, we should be announcing or looking at what our goals might be for 2020. So we've definitely been thinking about what that's going to look like. But our focus right now is to make sure we can achieve the goals that we've set forward, and then we're beginning to look ahead for what might be next around the corner.
Great. Now, I wanted to bring up the issue of seafood.
Right.
A lot of people here at South by have been talking about ocean health, water issues, and things that relate to the oceans in particular, and seafood being a big component of that. And I don't know where Red Lobster ranks up there, but I'll bet alone it's probably, some measurable chunk of the at least the United States seafood consumption.
Right.
Tell us a little bit about what your priorities are with regards to seafood specifically, and what you've managed to accomplish so far to make seafood more sustainable.
Well, it's a great question. So Red Lobster was the very first brand of all Darden brands, started in 1968 by our founder, Bill Darden, who really wanted to bring seafood to the masses. Seafood was something that you could only enjoy if you were on the coast or if you were of great wealth, and he thought that seafood was this great protein, a very healthy protein that really could help feed a lot of people. And the truth is that brand is now over 700 restaurants today and probably serves a good portion of seafood, although you can find seafood on all of our 2,100 restaurants menus today. But for us, in our pantry, seafood is our largest commodity. It's around 25 to 26% of our overall buy. The next greatest product behind that is beef. So we're really looking at seafood and at beef both, and trying to understand what are our responsibilities, how is it we work with our supply chain partners to help drive sustainability in each one of those value chains. Beef is something very new to us, so I'll put that aside for now, but for seafood, we've been at this for about 2 decades. For many years, Darden really was engaged in a number of initiatives on a global scale or even a local scale like the North American lobster to try to find ways to help fisheries become better managed. We're very privileged here in the United States that we have very well managed fisheries through NOAA. We have lots of state laws and regulations. We've seen a lot of fisheries rebound through the Magnuson-Stevens Act over the last 10 years, but that's not the case globally. Globally, there's a lot of places where they don't have good data management systems, they don't have good governance, and they don't have an ability to really manage the long-term health of those biomass. And so people who are in developed nations see it as a resource. It's something somebody wants to buy and they can make money off of it. And that's great, but if you've overfished that resource, which is around 70% of today's fisheries, then you're not going to have that resource in the long term, which both impacts the oceans and the ocean health, but also the economic health and the social viability of the people who live there. So when we talk about ocean health, we have to think of it in context way beyond just, pollution or trash or the reefs or the fish themselves, but also the economic development, the food provision that comes out of the oceans and this rich resource. And so we're very committed to working with a lot of different partners on how we can advance ocean health for the long term. Because if we don't have healthy oceans, we don't have healthy seafood. And if we don't have a good supply of healthy seafood, we don't really have a business. So we need healthy oceans so that we can be able to get the resources we need to serve to our guests.
And can you give us a couple specific examples of how you're actually doing that? I mean, I suppose we're reasonably confident that we're okay in the United States in terms of how we're managing things,
Right.
but you mentioned that presumably you source a lot of stuff from all over the place. Tell us a little bit about, are you working with governments, you're working with companies, you're working with your supply chain? What's the main dialogue you're having out there?
So we have great seafood here in the United States that's again well managed, but for the United States, I believe the number is somewhere around 80 to 85% of all seafood is imported into the United States. So we're talking the second largest trade gap behind oil and gas. Is seafood. And so really there's a huge gap. So there's an opportunity in the U.S. to grow domestic aquaculture. That's one of the things that we're really trying to advance with governments here, to talk and have those conversations about how we get more aquaculture here within the borders of the United States, so that we can grow our own, not necessarily having to source that on a global scale. But where we source globally, we work with our suppliers in using best aquaculture practice standards to make sure that the social, environmental, as well as health and food safety standards are followed. That's a process that we helped develop maybe 10, 15 years ago, because we saw that aquaculture could be very poorly managed. And we wanted to make sure that we were working with the actors who were investing in the people and in the kinds of systems that would make sure that the environments were kept safely. On the wild harvest side, we have a great partnership with the New England Aquarium, who provides advisory services to us on the probably 50-plus species we source around the world. And they help us look at gear types, they help us look at resource management plans, data management plans, so that when we go out to purchase a fish in a particular market, do we have the assurance that it's being sustainably sourced? How do we have conversations with our suppliers to make sure that they're using the right equipment and tools? And so one of the challenge fisheries that we've really been wrestling with quite a bit the last several years has been in Honduras. There's a large spiny lobster, which is great for lobster tails. It's not the typical clawed lobsters you see in Maine, but they make for great lobster tails. And we've been sourcing from that region for quite some time. But in Honduras, it's really the tale of two fisheries, right? So you've got the trap caught fishery, which is the more safe and environmentally healthy fishery and the way to do it. But then you also have what's called the dive caught practice. And so the dive caught practice, what makes it terribly difficult is that the more lobsters that they've been pulling out of the ocean, it means the deeper and longer divers have to go.
This is someone manually going down there.
Yeah, they're strapping on dive equipment and they're going underwater. Well, they're having to go too deep and they're going too far and they're coming up too fast.
Yeah.
And so literally we've seen hundreds of deaths, thousands of injuries in that region. We at Darden do not source any dive caught. We source all trap caught, but until that dive caught is closed, there's real challenges to the fisheries, and there's challenges to overfishing in the region as well. So 2 years ago, we made a commitment at the Clinton Global Initiative to invest in fishery improvement projects, because we believed in that many companies were making commitments around seafood, but it was sort of around buy or don't buy. And what we find in many fisheries is that you can decide not to buy, but that doesn't mean that they're not going to have a market to sell it to. More than likely, in the way that the growing population and demand and the rising middle class, the demand for that seafood is there. And so there are other countries that will buy that seafood without a qualm in the world. So if we disengage, we actually potentially hurt the fishery more than staying engaged. But we can't let them stay at status quo. We have to be able to move them forward. And so fishery improvement projects are a very concrete way that we can do action on the water. It's a multi-stakeholder approach. There's 16 or 17 NGOs NGOs that have sort of supported this, the way that these operate through the Conservation Alliance. And so we follow that policy and process, and we've been doing work with the Gulf snapper and grouper fishery, and there'll be a representative on our panel today talking about that. And then we're also working with the Walton Family Foundation now, and they'll be on the panel as well, launching a fishery improvement partnership fund. And the goal here is really to get more funds from foundations and companies and suppliers to invest in these kinds of on-the-water projects around the world. And the first project that we're going to be investing in over the next 2 years will be in Honduras, to continue to try to help move that fishery to a trap caught, but to also look at launching some artisanal fisheries, getting better management practices, some traceability work done, and then some long-term investments in what needs to happen for reef health.
Lots of stuff.
Lots of stuff. Yeah, fisheries are complicated. I mean, I have to say that for coming from a FedEx prior to this, I mean, it's a much different space. And fisheries are very local, but they're also very global. And so it requires companies to really be committed for the long haul. So we've been at this for really, I would say, as a company for 2 decades. But we're still learning. We're always growing. We're always developing. We're always seeing new technologies that are emerging. And that's what gets exciting around, I think, fisheries, is that there's a real opportunity for innovation. There's a real opportunity for people to come along and help provide new perspectives, new technologies, and new ways of making sure we can grow this protein, because it's a healthy protein to eat. It's one of the healthiest proteins on the planet to produce, and they create viable economic opportunities for healthier communities. So we see seafood as a win-win-win. Our customers love it, but we also want to make sure that we can provide them with the kinds of quality seafood that they expect.
Thanks a lot for a thorough explanation.
Yeah.
We're looking forward to following your progress. And Brandon, thanks for your time.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.